Welcome into our Busch Stadium studios, another edition of the Cardinals Insider Podcast. Brett McMillan, Elizabeth Meineke, and let's get right to it. Our guest today, the president of the St. Louis Cardinals, Bill DeWitt III. Bill, thank you for making the time to come on down. You've probably been in here before. Have you seen the new digs? Amy and crew really did a nice job. Lots of moments.
Yeah, this is cool. I'm used to just sort of the generic KMOX stuff, but you guys have really spruced it up. It looks good.
It's fun to look around and see all the different moments from Cardinals history, and that kind of got me thinking. One of the things, as we were talking through guests, was, we wanted to have you on because so much history with your family in St. Louis baseball. And so I started to try to do the math, but I thought, you know what, Bill probably knows. Like, how many years overall have you guys been involved, Browns, Cardinals? Do you know that number off the top of your head?
I don't. Maybe you could help me with the math. But, a lot of years. But my grandfather started in the front office working for Branch Rickey back in the early part of the 20th century, and he, I think, was doing concessions actually prior to that, and then jumped in with Branch Rickey. And he was kind of did everything for him, and then he rose up through the ranks in the Cardinals organization, became treasurer in the 30s. And, would have been a cool career in and of itself. He saw those world championship teams. He helped them build out that first farm system, and always attributed Branch Rickey to being his mentor and start in the game. And then he went on to a bunch of other things. I'll just summarize them really quick. He did a stint with the Browns, obviously, famously kind of for my dad, who grew up in that environment as a Browns fan because he was the general manager and owner at one point. Sold the club to Bill Veeck, and the famous Eddie Goodell story with my dad's uniform, and other great stories. And then he moved on to, when he sold the Browns to the group that ended up moving him to Baltimore in '54 was their first season. He went on and did a few things in the commissioner's office. Then he worked for the Yankees for a couple years as assistant general manager. Then he moved to the Tigers in the late 50s as general manager. And then his big move really in life was to buy the Cincinnati Reds in the early 60s. And while my parents both grew up in St. Louis rather, that was such a big deal for the family. They moved there. And so he sold the Reds in the late 60s, but my parents just stayed there and raised our family there. So I grew up a Reds fan, going to the big Red Machine games and stuff. But I had always heard about the Cardinals and the history and the years with the Browns. And just to wrap the story, my grandfather's final stint in baseball was with Bill Veeck again. They reunited to do something with the White Sox. He bought the White Sox back in the early 70s with Veeck. But he always had that itch, and so he decided if I ever have a chance to get back in, I'd like to. And that chance occurred. The first time actually was with the Texas Rangers, where he pulled in George W. Bush and a bunch of other friends who he had done some business with to buy the Rangers. And that was a cool project for them and for my dad and mom and stuff for a few years. But he wanted to be the guy because he'd seen his dad do that. And so when the Cardinals thing happened, that was 1996, and he finally had that role with the team where he was the decision maker. And I don't even know how I got on this topic. What was your original question?
How long you guys had been in baseball in St. Louis?
No,
right. But this is
exactly
great.
Answered the question. Yeah. Well, because
Right.
you were director. Were you director of marketing? I mean, because you came in pretty much with your dad when you guys took over the Cardinals, and you were director of marketing like during the McGuire years, correct, for the Cardinals? Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, I jumped in and did a bunch of projects, really kind of like business development projects. We worked with Vicki Bryan, who's still with us in the organization, and on a bunch of concession redos. One of the big projects I jumped into right away was the Jupiter Spring Training Complex. We had been in St. Pete for many, many years, 50 plus, I think. And there was a new development on the East Coast that the Braves and the Expos had been partners on. And then the Braves bailed on the deal and went to Orlando to do a deal with Disney, the Wide World of Sports thing. It left leaving a vacancy for that other team. And the Rays had just been announced as an expansion team. We kind of thought that would maybe take the bloom off the spring training rose in Tampa. It didn't end up being true, but so we said, well, let's try it on the East Coast. We did that, and so that was one of my big projects, was just helping finalize the design for that stadium. Now we're doing a big renovation. It makes me feel pretty old, because when you work on a new project, it just, in your mind, it's never old. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It's just weird to me that we're redoing that. But that was one of my first big projects, and then did a bunch of other things. And then the big one was the St. Louis project. You know, obviously Busch Stadium, Ballpark Village, you know, the whole sequencing of that, finding partners and construction folks and design work and all that. So I would say prior to this role as team president, those were the big ones that maybe prepared me, or at least, you know, threw me into the fire of Cardinals baseball and what our vision was for our physical plant.
Well, no, Brett and I were reminiscing about, we're like, when was the first time we met, you know, Bill? And we're like, it was our first day as employees. Because I remember when I started back in 2016, you know, I'm sitting there for my orientation with HR, and I looked down at my list, and there's a meeting with the team president, and the HR representative at the time explained to me, you know, Bill wanted to make sure that, like, the company's expanding, you know, we're hiring a lot more people, and he wanted to make sure that he recognized every face that worked for him. And I know Brett said you guys even got into a Cardinals history discussion because you wanted to make sure he knew.
I remember talking a little bit of that. Yeah, a neat experience. It always struck me, Bill. I think it's neat that you do that. I presume maybe still do, although there's a lot more faces around here than there used to be. But cool for us as employees just to have that touch point. And then getting to know you. You know, you're around, you're accessible, certainly. Why was that something that was important to you to do with new folks when they would roll through?
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of heard some of those stories as well, and it never ceases to surprise and amaze me and delight me that it does have an impact. You know, I think that when somebody comes in, they want to sort of know who's running it and all of that. So yeah, I do like to meet everybody. What we do now is over the course of like a couple of months, if there's 3 or 4 new people or whatever, we'll just aggregate everybody into a lunch meeting, and I think I have one of those tomorrow for some new people. So, and then we just kind of go around the horn. Where'd you come from? What'd you do before this? And I tell them about what I do. So that's a really fun thing for me. And it kind of reminds me of like when I was in high school, and the principal made it a point to remember everyone's name. I'm actually pretty bad at names.
You've remembered mine. I was impressed the other day, and I was like, you know, from that first meeting till now, I was like, he's never forgotten my name. So if you have, you've covered it well.
I mean, most people I do, but I mean, like we have a lot of younger folks who might just come in for a year or a summer internship, or those are the harder ones. But anyway, that always impressed me when I was in high school, when the principal knew everybody's names. I'm like, he's got to have a cheat sheet somewhere in his pocket, or a Facebook that he can refer to, or something. But yeah, those are fun things to think about. I feel
like it showed a level of care in detail about the Cardinals organization and what you felt it meant, you know, for people to work here, and kind of our perception publicly as well, that, you know, this is important in St. Louis and that this makes a difference to people and this means something to them.
Yeah, and I think the size of our business is conducive to, I wouldn't say quite family atmosphere or family environment, but like close to that, you know, where people feel comfortable and they feel like they're in a place that can lead to relationships outside of work, just friendly ones and whatever. But, you know, we're about 300 here in St. Louis, and of course it swells in the peak season with temps and things. And then there's a whole bunch of people not in St. Louis who might be in the player development system, or the coaches and the medical and strength and conditioning, all that group, and then of course the players. But you add all that up and you're in the 400 to 500. But I think for those of us who are here in St. Louis at headquarters, Busch Stadium, it's nice to know that size is conducive to sort of knowing who everyone is.
That brings to an interesting point, talking about logistics with staff, you know, a feeling. I want to go back to those 2 building projects you talked about, Jupiter way back when, and now things full circle, and then building this building. What's the process for that as you look at it high level to say, okay, we need to fold in this and that? Are you thinking about logistics of what has to be in a service level of a building, of fan experience, of aesthetic? I would imagine maybe all of the above. How do you, at an executive level, start wrapping your brain around either one of those projects?
Well, I mean, the nice thing about what we had already was a great staff and a long-term stable business of employees and things. So when it came time to like design the clubhouse of Jupiter, for example, I mean, I just grabbed Buddy Bates. I'm like, Buddy, how do we, let's look at plans together and you tell me. I mean, I didn't know anything. So it was really just more of a collaborative organizational sort of role. When I started to add my 2 cents into things, it would be things that I felt that either people had conflicting opinions about, or maybe it was more of the aesthetic piece of it, where I did a lot of homework on, look and feel. I had good relationships with the architects to understand where they wanted to take it, and occasionally I'd have an opinion there about moving it in a different direction. So I chose my lanes carefully as to when I wanted to make my mark on something and when I wanted to just facilitate a really productive conversation about the logistics of the building or whatever.
I know that I've seen you before, like at a portable, getting a hot dog, like during a game. Like I see you around the building. So as you have taken it in over your time here, what do you always hope that a fan experience feels like? I mean, top line when you come to Busch Stadium, because I know that you and your father and your family like very much are Cardinal fans, even though you're obviously working in the business in a big way.
Yeah, I mean, it all starts with the fans, really. I mean, the business is nothing without them. And in terms of the fan experience, people ask me a lot, like, what's it like watching a game? I'm like, it's just like you guys. I'm a fan. I want us to win. I mean, there's a little extra riding on it because of the business piece of it. But you also think about it beyond just like a single game-by-game thing, too. You're thinking about what the unfolding season means for next year and for planning. You're thinking about, what like just last week we had this crazy rainstorm that flooded our, lower part of our dugouts and a couple of other little low rooms. And I'm like, how do we fix that? What do we have to do? And so a fan isn't thinking about like next steps of a thing that occurs. I think when you're in the business, you start, just a lot more goes through your head when stuff happens. But you also want to get a feel for what it's just like to be a fan. So yeah, I'll walk around the concourse and be a little incognito and grab a dog or go to the Grateful Dead night and see buddies up there. And
hopefully we didn't just blow your cover.
But I don't mind it. There are some owners who relish it and they'll go out and almost like try to engage in a million conversations a night and sort of be like that out there. That's not really my personality, although I'm happy to do some of that. But I think you have to be kind of true to your personality. For me, it would be fake if I was out there like, patting fans on the back and, it's just not me. But I do very much care about the fans and what they're experiencing. And so I'll try to walk around and go and sit in a different seat or do this or that. When my son does his Little League game, I always make a point to sit out in the upper deck where their seats are after they do the parade on the field and then go up into the upper deck in the outfield because that is a different experience, quite frankly. I mean, we can get a little immune to thinking what we're experiencing in the front row or in the suite is what everyone's experiencing, and that's not the case. One of the things I really liked about the Savannah Bananas and when they were here is that the show was on the field, but there was all sorts of other things that they were pushing on to engage fans in different zones of the ballpark. And whether it's just some dumb T-shirt throw in left field or whether it's some characters acting out in the concourse or, they've got all these crazy stuff. I don't think we want to be quite that every night because 81 games of that would be a little much. But we definitely learned some things about how maybe you can engage the full range of everybody in the ballpark at different literally physical levers and different financial levels.
Well, I know that, we started to implement some of those things this year with things like the $5 beer and hot dogs in Budweiser Terrace on Friday nights. And one thing that I feel like Brett and I were discussing, before we started filming today is that I feel like in our time here, we've both been here probably around 9 or 10 years. I feel like there's been more changes behind the scenes over the past 2 years, both on the baseball side and the business side. Then in the time we've been here, and I know that has to start at the top, that you wanted us to go through this period of like evaluation, seeing what could be improved, and then obviously implementation, and then results, hopefully. But what is your end goal with all of the changes that we're seeing? Some of which, are publicly available, and others which, for proprietary reasons have to stay behind the scenes, especially on the baseball side. But what's kind of your end goal in moving us in that direction?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a lot of ways to take that, but I would say starting on the baseball side, a lot of the change is a function of just where we are in the competitive cycle and in Mo's tenure, right? So Mo expressed to us a few years ago that he's not going to do this forever, and he wants to kind of do it a couple more years. And we were happy to have him for a couple more years, and so we started thinking, okay, well, who's going to be next? And we started thinking about the various ways we could do this. When we identified Chaim as being available after his stint with the Red Sox, we thought, well, let's bring him in for a year to see how he likes the organization, do sort of a mutual feeling out period. And he really liked it. He was able to really think a lot about the organization and what it needed. And then obviously this year's been that transition year where we've identified him as going to take that role at the end of October, and but Mo was still had the reins all season, and it's pretty unusual actually. I don't really know of many other situations where it's happening. Ironically, it's happening in St. Louis with another team. The Blues are doing that with Steen, who was identified early on that he was going to be the next GM. But other than that, I don't really know of that being very common. Regardless, we felt like it was a pretty cool idea because, first of all, Chaim needed a little bit of time to acclimate to St. Louis. His family was in Wisconsin, Boston. He was happy with that interim period, and then Mo was had his time frame, and so he's been able to really understand the organization and make changes, and they've been very collaborative. And so the player development piece that he's changed, some of the new hires, you talked to Surf earlier in this podcast, who's got a great vision for player development. And so he's been really focused on that part of it. And so when he takes the seat, he's going to hit the ground running. It won't be drinking from a fire hose. He already knows people in the organization. I think it's a really cool thing. I'm hoping it works out. But that's the baseball side. On the business side, where we are in the competitive cycle, having, been a perennial playoff team to hovering around 500 now for a couple years, it's just a different situation, right? So instead of, every promotion working and causing an increment and spike in revenue, and you can evaluate it really easily in a stable demand environment. When your demand goes down a bit, certain things work and certain things don't work. And that's what we're learning. You guys know Anook Karunaratne, who came over from the Blue Jays. He's Senior VP of Business Development or Business Operations at the moment. And he was able to really help us in a few areas that he had already experienced in Toronto, because they'd been through a couple cycles when he was there. And so I'm thankful that he's been able to help us navigate some of that. Another one of the things that we decided we would need to do as part of this slightly different demand equation right at the moment is make the games feel a little bit different. At the postseason news conference last fall, I was asked, well, what do you say to the fans who aren't liking this mediocre baseball? And my first answer was, well, we're working on the game day experience. And I knew as soon as I said that, I'm like, can I reel that one back in? Because it probably isn't.
Welcome to the life of a journalist.
Right, exactly.
So many times I'm like, oh, let me just tweak how I wanted to say that.
Probably not what they wanted to hear as far as like, oh, we're going to turn up the music or we're going to, make the walk-up songs more youthful. I mean, people had certain visions of what that meant. But my point about that is that we had already been thinking, like, how do we do everything that's in our power on the business and operational side to make this a better experience for fans? And so in that topic, which should be placed appropriately as not the most important thing we do here, but very important nonetheless, we've decided to kind of make a Friday feel a little bit different than a Sunday, making a Tuesday night in April feel different than a Friday night in June, and there are a whole bunch of ways that we've been able to do that. And that's just kind of the starting point. I mean, we've looked hard at our theme nights, which ones are working, which ones are kind of ho-hum. Well, let's be more focused on ones that work and push a little harder on those, and let's be real experimental with the things that don't. One of the things that Anouk and I have talked about is having our game day guys and gals be not as risk averse as they were. And what that means is, like, let's take a few chances. They redid the scoreboard. I heard from some fans, wait a minute, out of town scores moved. Where are they? Like, people are sort of set in their ways, and I am too. Like, we're used to certain things, and if they change, it can upset people. If we don't do some things that bother people, and I'm not talking like major stuff, but like, let's be experimental in the game day stuff, then we're probably not pushing the envelope enough. Another example of that was the music in the concourse. Should it be the game day broadcast? Should it be the radio? Should it be the TV? Or should we be cranking tunes? I mean, I don't know the answer. It depends on the spot. So we've been experimenting a little bit of that, gotten some negativity on, I want to hear the game. I don't want to hear a song or whatever. So experimenting a little bit is important. And then other things on the business side, we've made some changes in corporate sales and in ticket sales, and really working hard on our media situation with FanDuel Sports Network. That whole space has been disrupted. Fans understand that. I think there's a lot of change happening. Many of our fans couldn't get our games for many years as the old cable model was failing and everybody was cutting the cord. Well, that's fine. You can cut the cord because there are all these streamers, but there was no way to stream Cardinal games. And so a lot of people just didn't have access to our product. And we were stuck on legacy contracts that were built for a different era of media, the business model. And so now we finally have a direct-to-consumer app that people can pay for every month and get Cardinal baseball. We have, we had 10 over-the-air games this year, which was a way to kind of get your toe back in the water of free games. I mean, look, in theory, you would love for every fan to have access to every game for free. But, there's a balance between, on the one end of the scale, all free to everybody with very little monetization, and then nothing free and everybody pays for what they watch. That's the extreme end of the other end of that spectrum. Full monetization, but not very good reach, right? And so we're in a hybrid situation where we're trying to balance those two competing dynamics, as are all hockey teams, all basketball teams, all baseball teams. Everybody's sort of playing this balancing act. And as we transition in the sports media industry from something where we've been to where we're headed. So working on that as well on the business side.
To me, it seems like there's a level of detail and care, and some of it happens behind the scenes by nature of the business. But, I really do feel that there is so much going on to like move things in a certain and particular direction, like under your guys' ownership. And, there's like an evaluation process, there's like an implementation tweaking process, and then ideally a results process. And so, where different areas of the organization fall into, in those three particular buckets, I definitely feel like there's, a lot of a lot of tweaking being done now based on kind of what you said. It sounds like so there's a pretty significant pipeline going between what we're doing and then also what you're hearing from fans. So how does that work? Like how do you kind of keep your pulse on what the fan base is interested in and their concerns and what they're expressing?
Yeah, I would say a couple answers. One is we do know that our fans aren't all similar in terms of what they're getting out of Cardinals baseball. And so we did a study last year, and it's sort of ongoing with ongoing surveys to segment our fan base and to understand, what a family of four might want out of Cardinals baseball versus, say, a young professional single or, an older hardcore fan who might have memories of Sportsman's Park or whatever. So, and so there's probably 8 to 10 types of those categories. And it's not to get in fans' business too much in the sense of it being like, oh, we know everything they're doing. It's more about how do you, instead of having just this, single way to market to fans, we'd rather create multiple ways to market to different groups of fans. And, we're not quite there in being able to understand every sort of buying pattern that somebody might have and therefore what they might want to buy tomorrow. But we're getting a little bit closer to that. And we all sense it with our social media and our Amazon, and they're marketing things to you that you realize you've been either talking about or thinking about or God knows what. But we're not at that level of creepiness by any stretch. But we do want to understand what our fan wants. And because we can offer different experiences. And so that's a piece of it. The other thing on the business side that you sort of alluded to was kind of this push for either modernization or however you want to call it. But, everybody knows about these analytics departments on the baseball side. Every team now has, 10 to 30 analysts crunching numbers in a way of looking at there's just so much data out there. Well, there's a lot of data on the business side too. And we've gone from, kind of one person keeping an eye on some things to now we've got 5 business analysts, and they're helping us really be almost like a service provider to the other departments. If somebody in stadium operations has a particular problem that maybe they don't have the infrastructure to solve, that might be data-driven or fan survey-based, they want to get feedback, business analytics team. If our sponsorship group wants to understand, and build a rate card for things that take a bunch of historical data about the value of our sponsorship assets, go to the business analytics team, help them with that project. I'm just giving 2 examples, but there's tons of them. So building out that function in the company is sort of has been a priority recently. And that might be a little bit to your point of you've noticed a little bit more of a push for data-driven approaches to solving some problems, and I would call it a modern sort of progressive business approach to some of the things that we're dealing with in what is arguably a mature business, and we've been here 140 years. So
always learning those. Sorry,
yeah,
right?
Pretty mature.
But the business has changed. I mean, there's so much innovation happening. There's a whole ecosystem of sports. Small incubator startups that are selling anything from performance wearable technology for players to, ticketing systems to, other technology ideas built for the sports ecosystem. So there's sort of a lot to think about in terms of staying on the front end of the innovation curve in sports. And these teams and these leagues have all seen an influx of really professionally managed teams on both the business and the baseball side. When we first started 30 years ago, I mean, there was a few teams that were sort of pushing the envelope on the baseball side of things, and then even fewer on the business side. And I'd like to think that we were on the front end of that curve for most of that time, and now we feel like a lot of teams have really caught up to us, and we got to figure out a way to take 2 steps forward and be ahead of the curve again.
The last couple years for a lot of us, for all of us, we're not used to empty seats. We're not used to too many tallies in the loss column. And I think that everything we've been talking about here really is kind of the response and feeds into this question of there's a lot of intentionality about the environment we're creating. But I just wonder for you, as a person who's been around for the entire time your family's been involved, been the president for a good chunk of that, what's it been like, I guess, to kind of weather the storm of 23, 24, 25 when life happens? It doesn't always go the way we want. But just on a personal level, what's it been like for you to kind of deal with the valley here between what we know will be some peaks?
Yeah, it's been tough. It's been tough because it's not like it's just like a month of this or a month. I mean, we're talking about, these cycles are long. And our winning cycle was super long, which was great. But now we're in a few-year period where, like you said, it hasn't been the playoff appearances and the deep October runs. And, it's like last night, it was a really sort of our first cool night of the summer. And I was thinking in my head, like, this feels like a playoff game. And yet, we didn't have the playoff crowd. And it was a little bit like I was feeling a little nostalgic for that feeling of when the air's a little crisp and you're just desperate for a win in a playoff game. And that, like, excitement and what could happen and the sky's the limit, I miss that, And I also think that being in it for this long gives you a certain amount of perspective because if you just started and this was the kind of approach you were getting from fan feedback and from the media and everything else, you'd go, why does anybody want to do this? Because it's like, there are a lot of pot shots and things like that. And I try not to focus on that. Again, control the things you can control and let the other stuff just happen. But I think it's smart to have your pulse on what generally the trends are with what fans are thinking, what they're saying, what social media is in aggregate saying you need to do or should do. And so I don't mean to say we just, put our hands over our ears, but having been in it this long, it does give you some perspective, knowing that if you can turn this thing around, you'll just never dwell on the years that weren't so great.
Right. It's kind of like the old baseball scout adage of a guy, hits a home run and then the next at bat he strikes out, punches out looking, and they say, well, it's in there. Like, we know he can do it. And I mean, I feel like we know that about our fan base. We know that about we know that about this environment. I mean, it's in there. It is a great baseball fanship. It is a great place to see a game. And the down parts of the cycle are what they are, and they are hard. And but there is a lot of cool things churning behind the scenes, like we've talked about. And I think that it's got to be exciting, too, to think that way. Like you mentioned, thinking about longing for that playoff atmosphere, to say that's going to be really cool. Not that anyone ever took it for granted, but coming out the other side, like, that's going to feel very rewarding, I would think.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We knew when we were doing it almost every year that it wasn't getting old and that, it may not last forever. But when we get back there, it'll be that much sweeter. And I've said this to a few people. When we've done some things like at the trade deadline where you're selling instead of buying, when we come out on the other side of this and we have a team that can compete for a title, it won't be in spite of what we went through. It'll be because of it, really, because, when you think about, just look at our two top prospects, from the draft that we just had, and Weather Holt. I mean, these are top picks. Right? You don't get the top picks when you're finishing first. Right. And so it's not purely formulaic, and we know that when you're winning, you can also still have a good farm system. In I think it was 2012, we had a World Series team and a number one farm system. So, like, to your point, we know this can be done, right? It's harder. There's more people chasing it in a very professional and organized and systematic way. But it can be done, and we plan on getting it done.
Well, it's been great to have you down here with us and just kind of talking things over. We appreciate you making the time and connecting with the fans in this way. Certainly meaningful to them, I'm sure, and we appreciate you making the time to talk with us.
Thank you guys. I know our fans love all the content you guys create that shows them behind the scenes, and it's much appreciated from us because we even learn some stuff when we see what you guys are doing. And
breaking news of the team owner.
Yeah.
I feel like I can retire now.
Yeah.
Like I've reached my life goal.
And then
awesome.
I can only imagine fans getting that full behind the scenes thing. So thank you guys.
Absolutely. If you want to check out any of those other previous episodes that we've talked about, Rob Serfolio or John Mozeliak recently, or any of the future episodes, be sure to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. For Elizabeth and Bill, I'm Brett. We'll talk to you next time on the Cardinals Insider Podcast.